Madame la greffière, c'est...
Madame Clerk, I think Madame Gaudreau asked a good question.
The video says it's going.
Non, on voit rien.
No, we don't see anything. Okay, there we have it now. Okay.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm actually live here at 35035B, but I still don't have a gavel, so you're going to have to consider my voice being gaveling our meeting in, and we'll continue on with the debate at hand on the motion before us that we adjourned from the other day. And I'm just learning, colleagues. So, is it top from bottom of the priority for the hands up?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Can you just? Okay, so I'll just have to. Can we put him in manually then? And I'm going to get a piece of paper, colleagues. If you just hang on just for a second. Okay, that'd be great. And then I can kind of modify the list. I have an electronic list and a live list. Mr. Angus is joining me here in the room, but I have the hands up. Mr. Barrett, you go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Chair. We find ourselves back here meeting on my motion from 2 weeks ago. And can you hear me there, Chair?
Thank you very much.
Are we okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. Sorry, we just didn't have audio in the room. Now we do. Thank you.
Okay, so we're almost 14 hours into this debate, and we've heard from members around the table and around the table again. This morning there were new documents released from the WE organization, and I unfortunately didn't have time to review them. I had announced yesterday that I would be speaking at 9:15 this morning, and at 9:15 those documents were released, and so I haven't had the opportunity to review them as I was engaged at that time, though I did receive questions on them during that press conference. Now, interestingly, one of the, though I haven't made it all the way through, one of the points that's been highlighted in these documents is that the WE organization identifies that Miss Margaret Trudeau spoke at 28 events and was paid for attending 27 events. Now, this contradicts a previous release in July where it was stated by the WE organization that Miss Margaret Trudeau was paid for 28 events. And so this adds more of an urgency to see the documents that have been previously ordered by this committee and that we're looking to order again today. The challenge that we've had as a committee and as parliamentarians who have had multiple committees initiate hearings on this, including government operations and official languages, notably the Finance Committee and our committee, is that we've received multiple answers that differ in the facts that have been provided. Today's release from the WE organization highlights that again. The information that's requested in these documents that would expose the named individuals to no risk or breach to their privacy is imperative. Parliamentarians have undertaken inquiries to determine if there is looking at this $500,000 in fees that we've now been told were paid to members of the Trudeau family, when initially we were told there were no fees paid to members of the Trudeau family. So that was a very important initial contradiction that was made. And then that organization received a $500 million contribution agreement to administer for the government. And it would have benefited to the tune of tens of millions of dollars as an organization for doing so. The proposal that they presented to the government, created by them, and we've heard that it's only this organization, the We organization, who could administer it. Well, they wrote it. Of course, they were the only ones who could administer it. But their proposal to cabinet included pictures of these very people that we've named in our motion today. What relevance does the relationship between the Prime Minister's family members, who were being paid huge sums of money by the We organization, have to do with the awarding of this contribution agreement? Well, it's important that we get all of the details, and we get the full details. We need to verify the information that's been presented. Was there a conflict of interest? Was there pressure? Was there interference? These are the questions that we need to answer. And after nearly 13 hours of filibustering at this committee by the Liberal members, it's important to note that the need for the information hasn't changed. And in fact, the release of documents this morning from the We organization only further adds to the need for clarity, the need for verification of the sums and the dates and the figures that have been offered to us to this point. It's true that we are in the midst of a global pandemic, and the lives and the livelihood of Canadians can be impacted and truly improved by the actions that members of Parliament take. But when we have parliamentary committees, and not just finance, dealing with a question of privilege of the illegal redaction of documents, not just this committee, which previously ordered these documents to committee and was stopped a day short by Parliament being prorogued. But we're seeing at other parliamentary committees, government members filibuster and block and prevent members from doing their work, even on COVID-related matters. It's imperative that we get this information so that we can make a determination on the scope of further work that this committee needs to do. This was the first meeting of this committee was when this motion was raised. We're in our fourth meeting, nearly 14 hours in, and members of the Liberal Party are unwilling to vote on the motion. And so I would invite members, all members, to consider that we have an opportunity to put forward business that can address the needs and the concerns of Canadians, while concurrently reviewing the information as it relates to the We scandal. And we can do that starting this morning. So, Mr. Chair, I would ask you if you could poll the committee to see if there is consensus that we take a vote. I see Liberal members shaking their heads already, and so the filibuster will continue. I expect, Mr. Chair, but I think that with the new documents that we've seen this morning, it's now it's proved very clearly the need that we have as members to review these documents. So, Chair, I, along with members of the official opposition, remain ready to vote before we crest the 14th hour of this filibuster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. Colleagues, you can't see him on the screen here because he's live with me. Mr. Angus is here. So I just wanted to give you, because I have kind of a hybrid list here. So right now we'll have Ms. Shanahan, Mr. Workington, Mr. Dong, Mr. Angus, Mr. Sorbera, Madam Goodrow, Mr. Fergus, Mr. Latanzio. That's the order in which the hands came up, or in the case here live, were waived. And so we'll now go to Madam Shanahan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you as always for clarifying the speakers list for us. It's very helpful. I did want to revisit some of the points that had been raised at our last meeting concerning the redaction process, the privacy process, the importance of respecting the privacy of individuals. But I would like to address indeed the documents that were just released this morning that my colleague, Mr. Barrett, spoke to. And I'd like to just read that out for the benefit of the committee members and for anyone that is watching here. And bear with me because, you know, age dictates that the glasses come on and the glasses come off. So the letter that was released this morning from the government House Leader addressed to the other House leaders, Monsieur Detel, Monsieur Terrien, and Mr. Julian, reads as follows. Dear colleagues, when Parliament was recalled last month, our government presented a strong plan to support Canadians during this global pandemic. Our main focus has been and continues to be how to best help and protect Canadians through these moments. The last few months demonstrated what Parliament can achieve for Canadians when parliamentarians work together. In that spirit, I was glad to see that we received your unanimous support for our plan to help Canadians who lost their jobs due to COVID-19. We recognize the financial impact of doing what needs to be done, all while knowing that doing less would end up costing more. That is why I agree that a special House of Commons committee dedicated to studying COVID-19 related investments should be established. Adopting the reasonable motion I shared with you previously will achieve this. This special committee will help ensure that other standing committees can do their work and focus on the issue that truly matters, COVID-19. For your convenience, I am also attaching our proposal to this letter. Unfortunately, the motion for a special committee put forward by the leader of the official opposition would not accomplish this. Rather than focusing on how the government and Parliament can work together to best support Canadians, Mr. O'Toole put forward a blatantly partisan proposal. Its main objective is to paralyze the government at a time when the entire government of Canada is focused on keeping Canadians safe and healthy. This proposal, were it to pass, would raise serious questions about whether the House of Commons continues to have confidence in this government. Similarly, opposition MPs have claimed that their privileges were breached by the hardworking and nonpartisan public service following certain redactions they made to the more than 5,000 pages provided to the House of Commons Finance Committee in August. In fact, so much information was provided that the Conservative Party launched a website to ask the public's help to review the exhaustive amount of information. So as to move forward, Liberal members have offered to have these public servants appear at committee and explain the reasons behind the redactions that were made. Thus far, you have refused this reasonable step, choosing to forego due process. As explained by the clerk of the Privy Council and deputy ministers in their letters to the committee, redactions were made to protect cabinet confidence following the exact directive of the motion adopted at committee. Though these letters were provided to committee members, opposition members seemed intent on ignoring them, And so I am sharing another copy of the letters with you. They also redacted items that were completely irrelevant to the Canada Student Service Grant Program, as it was not information requested by the committee. Finally, the public service respected their statutory obligations throughout this process. However, rather than permitting public servants to explain this, you have already decided that they are in contempt of the committee for not providing information that the committee never requested. That is why our motion will also give a forum for the public service to further explain the reasons for their redactions. If, after hearing from public servants and the law clerk and parliamentary counsel of the House of Commons, the committee remains unsatisfied, the government has made clear it is open to working with the committee to address its concerns. Furthermore, the House of Commons Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics Committee is debating whether to force private citizens to provide personal financial information to the committee. I believe that the House of Commons would be severely abusing its authority in doing so. No Canadian should have to fear that parliamentarians may arbitrarily force them to divulge their personal financial information, even more so when they did nothing wrong. As a demonstration of transparency, the Prime Minister has asked that I proactively share exhaustive information with you about events organized through Speaker Spotlight, for which the Prime Minister was a guest speaker. Speaker Spotlight has confirmed the accuracy of the events and fees listed. You will also find this information accompanying this letter. I can also confirm to you, as previously disclosed, the only payment to Ms. Grégoire Trudeau regarding We Charity and any of its affiliates was the February 2012 event for $1,500. However, we will continue to strongly oppose attempts by committees or the House of Commons to target extended family members of parliamentarians who are not involved in political life. Finally, in regards to the numerous forthcoming motions for the production of documents at different committees, the government will do all that it can to provide the information requested by parliamentarians. In normal times, calling for the vast production of documents across multiple departments places a significant strain on public servants who must physically go to the office to conduct such searches. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I fear that such sweeping document production motions with extremely tight timelines put forward by Conservative MPs are intentionally designed to be impossible to complete. In the midst of rising cases of COVID-19 in the National Capital Region, the government will not put at risk the health and safety of hundreds, if not thousands, of hardworking public servants. We want them to remain focused on delivering supports for Canadians, as should all parliamentarians. I sincerely hope we will continue to be able to work together constructively for Canadians. We believe we have put forward an extremely reasonable proposal that will permit parliamentarians to be focused on the issue that should be occupying most, if not all our attention, the health and safety of Canadians during this global pandemic. Sincerely, and it's signed the Honorable Pablo Rodriguez, Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. The appendix to this document also includes a list of speaking events that the Prime Minister, at a time that he was not the Prime Minister, but first a private citizen and then as a Member of Parliament, was speaking at events, the University of British Columbia, Toronto District School Board. I'm just naming a few of them, Chair, just to give a flavor of the types of organizations that, yes, wanted to have a speaker, a keynote speaker of the reputation of Justin Trudeau at their event. And I challenge my Conservative colleagues to continue on this vein of implying that these charitable organizations, nonprofit organizations, esteemed institutions were somehow seeking to influence someone that they thought might be in a position to help them. We're looking at groups such as the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers, the Ontario Hospital Federation, the Alberta Teachers Association, Carleton University. We continue the London Convention Centre, Reading for the Love of It. That's a wonderful title for a group. Eventful Times, Blessed Events, the London Interfaith Counselling Centre, the Municipal Finance Officers Association, York University, a number of universities on the list. We continue going forward, the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association, Charity of Hope, the Regional Municipality of Halton, Humber College, the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, Charity of Hope, Kincardine District Secondary School, Queen's University, Literacy for Life, Grace Foundation, and I could go on. Mr. Chair, I do find it very forthcoming on the part of our Prime Minister and our government House Leader to have put forward this information, again, in the interest of all transparencies. And I want to return now to the points that were brought up at our last meeting, and that's regarding the redaction process and why it is so important that this be done by nonpartisan, professional civil servants and the principles that they observe and do so.
Excuse me, Madam Shannon, point of order by Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus?
The issue of redaction of documents has nothing to do with our committee. If the member wants to speak at the Finance Committee, she can go to the Finance Committee. We're talking about a different set of documents. So I think maybe the member's getting confused, but I think it's not good for the public record to have these kind of gross errors. We're talking about the Speaker Spotlight documents. We should stay focused on that.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Continue on, Madam Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the comments by my experienced colleague, but he did raise at our last meeting the issue of the 5,000 documents and the redaction process, and we did speak about them then, and I want to return to that because it is a principle that is where we need to have this balance between transparency, but also for protection. So I take that my learned colleague's good point, and maybe we'll return to it at another time. So I cede the floor. Thank you, Chair. Oh, and I do need to table the documents. So I think, do I email them to the clerk?
Yeah, just go ahead and email them to the clerk. That would be great. I just wanted to review the speakers list again, because Madam Latanzio, you were on as the last speaker just after Mr. Fergus, and I see your name has now been removed. Did you wish to stay on the list, or did you remove your name?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'd like to stay on. I just like to point out that I've been logged off at least 2 times during this meeting. So I just want the clerk to be made aware of the situation. I'm trying my darnest to be able to stay on, but I shall raise my hand again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, that's why we have a manual list as well as an electronic one. So we'll continue on trying to learn about how to navigate through this as we do these virtually, or hybrid, actually. Now we're on to Mr. Workington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me there.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Very good. Well, the Prime Minister, we do know that the Prime Minister does not want these documents to be released. Everything that the Prime Minister has done since there was any indication that these documents could be released has been to stop the documents from coming forward and to shut down the investigation that led to what is now known as the WE scandal. We know that these documents had been approved by this committee. They've been called for by this committee, and just hours before they were due to be brought forward to this committee, the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament, ending not only the session of Parliament, but also the investigation and the release of these documents, basically setting all things that the committee had done aside and canceling them until such time as committees would be reconstituted. Of course, at the time, he said it was not to kill the investigation, that it was in fact to do some other things. It was to reset the parliamentary calendar. We have subsequently learned that the Prime Minister had no new ideas. Every piece of legislation that he intended to move forward with before the prorogation he has continued on. So there's no argument that it had anything to do other than to simply stop the investigation into himself and his involvement with the WE organization, the awarding of the money, and of course these documents could prove that. But the Prime Minister did the unprecedented thing by shutting down Parliament so that he could end the investigation and end the release of these documents. Subsequently, the Liberal Party has been engaged in a unprecedented filibuster at this committee to ensure that these documents don't get called for again. We're now into the 14th or 15th hour of debate with regards to if or not these documents should be brought forward. Obviously, the committee has made the decision in the past that they should come forward, and the Liberals now are trying to have a do-over in a situation where they would get their way and ensure that these documents never see the light of day. It's interesting because when the Prime Minister was not yet the Prime Minister, but promising to change the way that things work in Ottawa, he said that his government would be open by default, that in any situation and every situation, they would provide openness and transparency and accountability to ensure that Canadians would see what the government was doing and be able to render their own judgment on what the government was doing. But this government has turned into the most secretive and dismissive government of all time. It's just interesting that the Liberal MPs keep calling the opposition MPs, suggest that they're playing politics simply by demanding what the Prime Minister promised before he was the Prime Minister. It's unconscionable that the Liberal MPs continue to dismiss opposition MPs. We are in a minority parliament. The more Canadians voted for the opposition MPs than the Liberal MPs, and the Liberals think that they can demand that the opposition MPs follow their lead and help limit the access to these documents. But what they seem to forget is that I don't just speak on behalf of myself. My colleagues don't just speak on behalf of themselves. They speak on behalf of their constituents. And the majority of Canadians sent opposition MPs to this parliament to hold this government to account because they had questions about this government. They didn't trust this government. They wanted there to be accountability, and they wanted a measure of insurance that when Canadians needed to see what was happening behind the curtain, that they would have access to that through their members of parliament. And these Liberal MPs continue to dismiss opposition MPs as if they are just simply a nuisance, that they should be done away with and they should be ignored. Well, to my colleagues on the Liberal side, not only do we have a responsibility to hold this government to account, you do too, through the chair, to my Liberal colleagues. You are not members of cabinet. You are not the Prime Minister. You have a responsibility to hold your government to account in the same way that we have a responsibility to hold this government to account. The Prime Minister, before he became the Prime Minister, said that committees would be independent. As a matter of fact, he went the extra mile by saying that that parliamentary secretaries would never sit on parliamentary committees to ensure that the government would not be dictating to committees as to what they would and would not do. Well, the Prime Minister broke that promise. He now allows parliamentary secretaries from the Liberal Party to sit on parliamentary committees. So he's already broken that. But what he has done with the suggestion by Ms. Shanahan today is he has gone a measure further by giving instruction directly from the Liberal House Leader to this committee as to how we should conduct our business. Well, that is a significant distance from where committees should be operating independent of the government and of Parliament. We are masters of our own destiny. That is the entire foundation by which we can operate to ensure accountability and transparency for Canadians. But today, the Liberal Party has gone a significant distance further in eroding accountability and transparency by having the House Leader of the Liberal Party of Canada dictating to the Ethics Committee what we should and should not be doing. Having the Prime Minister clearly giving instruction to the Liberal members on this committee as to what they should and should not be doing. This is unprecedented. In all my years, there have been suggestions through the years that that government MPs were getting direction from their government and from their Prime Minister's office. But I can tell you, never have I ever seen a member of the government at a committee, especially an opposition-led accountability committee like the Ethics Committee, show up with a letter from the Liberal House Leader instructing the committee as to how they should engage in their activities. This is unprecedented. I'm dumbfounded by this. It's just unbelievable. They are now telling us that, we assure you nothing went wrong. The entire Liberal argument is the Prime Minister promises that, he now, having corrected his, what he originally said, now he's telling the truth. He wasn't maybe telling the truth to begin with, but now he's telling the truth. So just trust the Prime Minister now. Well, we can't do that. We've learned that enough times. The Prime Minister's story always changes. The moment that he gets caught, it's always somebody else's fault. So we can't take the Prime Minister's word on any of this. The Prime Minister hasn't been transparent. He hasn't been honest. He hasn't been truthful on this and many other things. And so then they say, well, if you can't trust the Prime Minister, trust the WE organization. They've now got new documents that are different than the last documents, but this time it's honest. This time it's true. Well, I wonder if the Liberal members recall that when this whole thing started, the WE organization said that they didn't pay. They never paid. We had the chair of the WE organization saying that they'd never paid anybody to speak. Well, all of a sudden, she found out that she didn't even know what was going on at the WE organization. She didn't know what deals were being developed behind her back. And yet the Liberal members would say, well, trust the WE organization, whoever that is now. this organization that is now scrambling out of our country because in the light of day, all of a sudden they don't want to operate in Canada anymore. I don't think we can trust the WE organization. I don't think we can trust the Prime Minister. I don't think that we can trust the Liberal House Leader to give instruction to this committee so that we can actually find out what happened. It is left to us as honourable members, having representing Canadians, to bring into the light of day what has gone on behind closed doors. I will quote the words of the guy who is now the Prime Minister. He is clearly a different person than he was when he was trying to be the Prime Minister. I do think that we should be open by default. I think when there's an argument as to if or not we should have documents, I think we as members of Parliament can be trusted to protect the privacy of Canadians, but ensure that we do the due diligence that we are sent here to do. If my Liberal colleagues believe that they don't have a job to do in holding their government to account, they have no responsibility to hold Justin Trudeau to account, that they have no job to be done to do here, well, then they could give up their paycheck or resign their seats and see what Canadians have to say. I think Canadians would send people in their place that would hold this government to account. And maybe even some Liberal members would do the job of holding their government to account. I've seen that in the past, where even Liberal members, when even government members will hold their government to account. But there's such an erosion, it seems, to the extent that we now have members of Parliament who sit on this committee showing up with letters from their Liberal House Leader giving instruction as to what we should have access to and what we should not have access to. That is unprecedented, that is undemocratic, that is not transparent, and that is it's a fundamental failing in our democracy if that's where we are today. And I would suggest that Liberals need to look at themselves in the mirror and find out who sent them to this place, what the reason was. Is it just to protect the Prime Minister, or is it to do the good work of protecting the interests of Canadians? And I would suggest that the members, upon reflection, would recognize that they have a responsibility to protect the interests of their constituents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, colleagues. I was just reviewing the list here. I have right now, again, a different list than I have electronically. I have Mr. Dong, Mr. Angus, Mr. Sorbera, Madame Goudreau, Mr. Fergus, and Madame Latanzio. And then I also have Mr. Kuzmerchik, who is, I guess, is going to be subbing in after. Do you intend to speak first, Mr. Sorbera?
Point of order, Chair.
Yes, you can.
I will be. I have to exit now. I just want to wish everybody a good afternoon. I do have to bring my daughter and wife down to Sick Kids. My daughter's having her appendix removed later on today, so I'll be with the family today. But I do want to wish everyone a wonderful Monday. I hope in the spirit of collaboration that the committee continues to work for the good of all Canadians and the good of all of our residents that we represent. But I do want to wish everyone the rest of the day. I apologize, and it's unfortunate that I can't be here with you folks as we continue this discussion. That is very important for Canadians, but I do wish everyone a great afternoon. I hope not to see everyone this evening when I get to sign back on. Let's hope, but nonetheless, if need be, I hope to be able to do so later on today. So I want to wish everyone a great afternoon. Thank you, Chair, for that time.
Good luck to your daughter.
You're welcome. All the best for your daughter. I'm certain that speaks for everybody here in the committee, and no need to apologize. You need to look after your family.
Thank you, Chair.
Do I have the pronunciation right? Is it Mr. Kuzmerchik?
Yes, excellent, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kuzmerchuk. I have you on the list now as the final speaker after Ms. Latanzio. So far on the list, it may grow. These things happen. Mr. Dong, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I lower my hand. I'll speak at a later opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now on to Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am thinking of Mr. Sorbera, who's an excellent member of Parliament, and I have a lot of respect for him. And family is.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. A point of order, Mr. Chair. Madame Gaudreau, go ahead. Your mic is not on.
En fait,
Yes. I would like to be able to see Mr. Angus when he speaks to us, but unfortunately we don't have the video feed right now.
Is here live, so I don't know if we can get a video feed for him. Let me work on that. I'm certain that's what your concern was, and for ma français pas bon.
My French isn't very good, but I think I understood you. Thank you.
We're going to see if we can get Mr. Angus on the screen.
C'est correct?
That's fine.
Okay. Commence, Monsieur Angus.
Thank you. Well, I've lost count of how many hours we are in this filibuster, and I am very frustrated because we have work to do with this committee, and this committee that is specific to ethics. And I am very concerned when I get a letter from the Liberal House Leader's office telling our committee what we will and what we won't do. I think that this is very unfortunate. My focus in being here and pushing for this investigation was to find out about political interference and political connections that made the decision to award that enormous amount of money to the WE Group. Money that the Prime Minister had said would have been close to $1 billion to university students, and not a dime of that money ever went out the door, and university students never got the funds that they needed. So we have an obligation here to find out how those decisions were made. I find it deeply offensive that the Liberals continue to throw the Civil Service of Canada under the bus, blaming them for the redacted documents, saying that it was their idea to go forward with this, when the evidence that we've gathered in a very short period of time shows different. We have only had, I think, 2 full committee meetings at the Ethics Committee on the WE scandal, and we need to get to these issues. We need to get to the questions about whether or not the lobbying that was done through WE with their hired government outreach people, whether that was legal or illegal lobbying, whether or not they were using connections because of their close contacts with senior ministers to get meetings that did not meet the test and the standard of transparency under the Lobbying Act. That's what we need to be looking at. And I am insisting that we will get there. We know now that the documents that we got, and I appreciate Madame Shanahan talking about the redacted documents, but the redacted documents that were given to Finance that we had a chance to look at contradict deeply the position taken by Madame Chagger, who made a claim that this was brought to her by the civil service, that the civil service thought up the idea, that she had never had any conversations about this proposal, when we know now that the April 17th meeting with Ms. Chagger and Craig Kielburger was a key moment. And so we need to get clear answers on that. So this work has to get done. There has been suggestions that the Liberals will work with us on a committee, and I'm hoping they will. But if we have a special pandemic committee that is run by Liberals that tries to shut down our work or tries to swamp us, I still reserve the right as a member of this ethics committee to continue the investigation that we started, because we have obligations to the Canadian people. If I can be assured that the Liberals will work with us on a credible committee that will actually get answers, I'd be more than willing to transfer some of this work from ethics over to them. But if they're not willing to do that, then I will retain my right as a parliamentarian to continue the work that we've done here. As for the standoff that we've come to, I think one of the unfortunate things, there's a lot of machismo in politics, and I think the more women we get in politics, the better it will be. But I do find that even with more women in politics, we still end up with a lot of machismo and showdowns that we need to actually find a solution to. And so I'm trying to find a solution here. This morning, documents were released, and I think documents were released because of the pressure of our committee. We know that the WE Group has released a number of documents regarding speaker fees and other issues. We need to look at those documents. At the last minute, the Prime Minister's office has released documents regarding his speaking fees and Sophie Gregoire's speaking fees. So there is movement on these documents. The sticking point, what the Liberals say, is that they don't want family members to be involved. That's the mother and brother. And I understand that. I think that whenever we ask for these things, we are crossing a Rubicon in terms of precedent that could be very, very damaging if we establish that precedent. I think that these documents are worth looking at because the family was paid by the We Group. But I don't think, for me, this is the hill to die on. Whether or not Margaret Trudeau was paid for 27 or 28 appearances does not change the fact. The fact is we know that the We Group paid Margaret Trudeau and Sacha Trudeau to participate in events after the public was told they weren't paid. So what we do know is if it was 27 or 28 events, those are facts. They aren't as relevant to our committee work in terms of getting to the issues of lobbying, getting access to ministers. That's what I think we need to focus on. So the government has stepped forward and the We Group has stepped forward with some of the documents. We should be able to verify the documents on Madame Gregoire and Mr. Trudeau. So to that, trying to bring forward a solution here, I would offer a friendly amendment to my Conservative motion that we set aside for the moment the issue of payments to Margaret and Sacha Trudeau. We say that we will accept that. We'll put that to the side. We will ask for the verification of the Speaker documents regarding payments to Mr. Trudeau and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. And if we get agreement on that, then we can move forward with the witness list that we have for this We study that I think is the key issues, particularly for me, the issue of the lobbying that went on in the awarding of this contract. So I would like to bring forward a friendly amendment to my friendly colleagues of all stripes that pursuant to Standing Orders 1081A, an order of committee do issue to the Speaker Spotlight for a copy of all records pertaining to speaking appearances arranged since October 14th, 2008 for Justin Trudeau and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. And that they be provided to the Standing Committee on Access to Information. If the Liberals want to verify that the Prime Minister's payments are correct, they should be going along with this. I appeal to my Conservative colleagues. We do need to get this committee rolling, and we have some serious, serious issues about this investigation. I am less concerned about Margaret Trudeau being paid 27 or 28 times. This is an attempt to break the logjam, and I'm looking to my colleagues to say, can we move forward on this?
Mr. Angus has moved an amendment to the motion. Mr. Angus, do you have that in writing?
Well, it's as written as best as I've ever written, and the nuns always said my penmanship was a disgrace. So I will leave it to our very intelligent clerk to see if she can make sense of it.
Just for the clarification for members on the committee, is it substantially the same other than removing the family members that are?
Yeah.
Okay. So colleagues, now we are moving to a debate on the amendment to the motion. So now we will go to, have you?
Oh, the nuns were right.
They were correct, yes. Oh, so how about we just do this?
Just give me a moment, colleagues, as we sort out this, the wording of the amendment.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Yes, Madam Latanzio, yes.
Can I ask that once we get the wording finalized, that it be read in full?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do to make sure we have some complete clarity.
I think to keep it simple, I would just drop Margaret Trudeau and Alexandre Trudeau's name and leave the rest of it intact.
Okay. So colleagues, basically, if you read the motion as it is today, simply removing the two other members, Margaret Trudeau and Sacha Trudeau, then the rest of it remains the same. So we're going to be debating that amendment now. And Mr. Angus, you've completed your time. Now on to Madame Goudreau. Madame Goudreau, it's your opportunity to debate. We're on the debate of the amendment of the motion.
Oui.
Yes. Well, I would like to give you my reading. There's things that I do not agree with my colleagues, which mean that... Yes, Mr. Chair, do you hear me? Can you hear me? Or
Trying to get it here in the room, okay?
Okay.
Or if you put your earphone on, your normal, you have a, no, we don't have.
Oh, I see. Oh, excuse, yeah, of course.
Do you have, okay. Mr. Angus, you've got your earphone in. Are you getting the English speak?
Yeah. Commence.
You can start, Madame Goudreau. Yes. Well, here I go. So, what I've heard in the preceding minutes are making reference to the continuum of our work that we as parliamentarians need to accomplish. I would like to make a statement. I've heard people who are speaking of their conscience and that they need to go above and beyond partisanship, but we do realize that over the summer there was a committee that was looking at bringing light with it was a huge amount of money. And having participated in the special committee, the finance committee, as well as the ethics committee, we were moving ahead very well. And we were able to make a great step forward. And why am I speaking of this to you today? Is that for a few hours now, for several hours, we've been asking, once our work was stopped, and maybe you enjoyed your relaxation, but I didn't think that we should stop so quickly, so abruptly. But I really don't think we can deconstruct what, for all practical purposes, was a very good start, and we were getting somewhere. We were with elements in hand, and we knew what was missing. So I don't understand why there is so much energy, and here we have a door that's opening on a friendly amendment, because I did hear my colleagues on the government side saying that this is going to go to how far? The family, the extended family, and whether you're comfortable with that or not, to get our family involved. We do need to bring light on the subject. And now we have a friendly amendment, which would mean that whether it's adopted or not, that Mr. Barrett's motion is adopted or not, in any case, what we're saying together, and I want to hear it in each of your words, you have agreed that once we mentioned, and you may remember when we spoke about a special committee to complete our work so that we would be able to look at all of the issues of lobbying, conflict of interest, issues of personal information. I won't give you the full list. You're full aware of it. However, we need, and it's our duty, to complete what we were doing up until the 13th of August. So, in whatever way it's going to happen, I would like to invite you to stop stretching everything out and to go ahead with dignity in your work, with the awareness that in one way or another, I think we do agree, and it's the same issues in the Finance Committee. We want to be able to finish what we have started, the work we have started. So with all of the elements, because despite the fact that there were many different stories, there was very pertinent information which would lead me to believe that if we could adopt this amendment, I would hope that we will be able to complete our work so that we could continue to bring light and move ahead with our work. Because in any case, and I'll repeat, I think that we all agree that we need to continue to work on these issues, and also we need to finalize, while we respect, of course, each and everyone's personal opinion. So when I think it was Madame Shanahan who was saying, how far is this going to go? Well, when I spoke, as I started as a member of parliament, I was aware that my partner, my husband, that if there was an apparent or if there was an apparency of conflict of interest, we were linked. I did understand that. I do understand that. And I think that we could discuss the matter for hours. And I think we might come to a consensus, because in any case, we have rules that we must respect, particularly when we are at a high level. And for me, there are elements missing to allow us to make a judgment. And in terms of details, we can discuss that. And I think that we need to discuss it within the framework of a special committee. So, dear colleagues, I would like to continue, but since I am a person who is conscientious in her work and who until now is thinking of my constituents in every day, and who have been saying, can you do all at once? Yes, well, we can do that. We spend hours on the issue. So I am calling upon you, and I'm taking the position for the amendment. I am in favor, and I really would like us to be able to express that the next speakers would speak to the amendment so that we can move ahead with a vote, because you have a full day ahead of you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just to be clear, Madam Goodrow, because we are now on the amendment, and so this it's not as obvious to me as the chair. You're speaking for the amendment and in support of the amendment. D'accord. Merci.
Yes, thank you.
View the speakers list once more. So now, yes, it's okay, Madam Shanahan. I'm on it. So, right, Mr. Kuzmerchik, you were after Madame Latanzio, and your name dropped off again. So I just need to make sure that you didn't move down the list purposely. Did you still want to remain on the list where you were, or did you somehow get cut off by your electronic connection?
I just thought that we were going to be renewing the list after the amendment was put forward, so I just wanted to lower my hand and then re-raise it again. I'm fine, Chair, wherever you place me on that list.
All right. Well, I will put you back right after Madame Latanzio, because that's where you were. There's no need to renew it. We just move into a different debate in that regard. So
great.
It will be,
thank you.
It will be Mr. Fergus, Madame Latanzio, Mr. Kuzmerchik, Madame Shanahan, Monsieur Gourde, and then Mr. Dong. So now we'll move to Mr. Fergus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I really do appreciate you making, once again, ably chairing our meetings. Et puis aussi, j'aimerais...
And also, I would like to speak in favor of this amendment. I feel that what Mr. Angus has proposed has a lot of merit, and that for several reasons. First of all, the motion, despite the fact that I don't like the idea, I still don't like the idea that the members can inquire into other MPs, investigate other MPs, I am in favor of Mr. Angus's motion, because now he is limiting this to what we see in the laws on conflict of interest. And so I congratulate him. I think that this is a very elegant way to be able to calm things down and to allow our committee to move ahead to issues that are much more important. Mr. Chair, I think that if there were something that would unite Mr. Angus, Madame Gaudreau, and myself, as well as other members around the table, it would be the question of moving ahead with the priority of the Ethics Committee and to get beyond the situation where we're going to study facial recognition so that we can ensure that Canada will be able to move ahead with a framework, a legislation, or regulations that will give us clarity. So we won't simply be in a situation where basically we don't have any legislation on these issues. So for myself, this is an important priority, and we have little time left to be able to create this framework, and it's very important that we move on to that issue. I also appreciate that Mr. Angus is doing this maybe somewhat counter to what he would like to do, but I think he is to be congratulated for having found that option. I think, Mr. Chair, that the Prime Minister and certainly Madame Grégoire Trudeau and through Mr. Rodriguez have shown that they have nothing to hide. They have put forth all of their appearances when they spoke, and as Prime Minister and leader of the party, I think that it shows his goodwill. And when you also add the fact that the Prime Minister testified for several hours before the Finance Committee, and that his head of cabinet did the same, and that all of the government officials also testified before the committee, before the Finance Committee. I think, if you will allow me to make a short comment, I think it's important to let Canadians know that we have heard accusations that I believe are not correct. Mr. Workington's comments with respect to the Prime Minister, for example. And we have someone who has never, was always very clean, and maybe that's not the right word, I'll withdraw that, that he has always followed the necessary measures to be transparent. And over the last few weeks, I was able to go over the record of this committee. And when Mr. Workington was, in 2013, he was a member of the Ethics Committee at the time, not just once, but it's on several occasions when the issue that was brought up by the opposition concerning the Prime Minister at the time, Mr. Harper, I can quote what Mr. Workington said several times, and I will read it.
Commissioner is currently reviewing the circumstances and the submission that has been brought forward. And then he says later on, we also know that the Prime Minister has answered questions with regard to this. And then here's a great conclusion. It's an interesting and very partisan motion that's being brought forward. Alors, il me semble que Mr.
So I think that Mr. Workington has used certain rhetorical tools when it suits him. But I think it's somewhat less legitimate when it's other political parties that are using the same reasoning. Nonetheless, we're here to speak to Mr. Angus's amendment. And once again, I would like to congratulate him for his modifications. And I think that it is a very elegant solution, which allows us to move ahead with other things. And I hope that people will move with it, and that we will be able to let go of these spurious allegations.
Finally put our efforts towards issues which are most important for Canadians, such as the facial recognition policies and such as other measures which we had identified at the beginning of this Parliament for the Ethics Committee. So there is just one element which I wouldn't mind seeking clarification from my honorable colleague, Mr. Angus, Mr. Chair, and I don't know what the proper procedure is to do this. I don't know if I should ask this question through you. I know it's not usually our habit to have a back and forth, but I know I was wondering if the chair, or perhaps we can ask them to. If the clerk could just read back exactly the full amendment, because I think there's one part of it that I would love to get clarification, but maybe it's just better that I ask for the clerk to read the motion in full, so that I could have a clear understanding. And Mr. Chair, with your agreement, I would like to just make a comment at the very end after she reads the motion. Would that be all right?
That is fine, Mr. Fergus. You will read the amendment now, and the clerk is prepared to send it out electronically very shortly as well. So, Madam Clerk, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That Charlie Angus moved that the motion be amended by removing the following: Margaret Trudeau and Alexandra Trudeau.
So, Mr. Chair, then would it be possible, because when Mr. Angus has first started reading it, he read out a full positive motion. Now we have the removal of two different words, which is great. But I was wondering if the clerk can read then what the motion would look like if it were passed.
Yep. Okay. The motion, should the amendment pass, would read as follows: that pursuant to Standing Order 108-1A, an order of the committee do issue to Speaker Spotlight for a copy of all records pertaining to speaking appearances arranged since October 14th, 2008 for Justin Trudeau and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, including, in respect of each speaking appearance, an indication of the fee provided any expenses that were reimbursed, and the name of the company, organization, person, or entity booking it, which had been originally ordered to be produced on July 22nd, 2020, by the Standing Committee on Access to Information.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, Madam Clerk's microphone has stopped after July 22nd.
Okay, all right. I'm certain that you'll have the patience.
And you're on mute, sir.
Oh, you can't hear me at all?
Is anybody else having this problem?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can certainly hear myself in my earpiece, so I think, Mr. Ferguson, might be some issue with your reception.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm not hearing you at all. Is anybody else not hearing the chair, or is it just me?
You want to suspend it?
Okay, we're colleague.
Oh, here we go.
You got it. Okay. Okay. All right. Then the clerk will begin once more.
I apologize.
You have the full thing again, or just from July 22nd, 2020?
You're good till just to have the clerk continue from July?
Sure.
Okay. Which had been originally ordered to be produced on July 22nd, 2020 by the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, provided that these documents shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 24 hours of the adoption of this motion, and that the documents be reviewed in camera.
Thank you. Actually, that was the key part that I would like to address, and I thought that's why I was interested in Mr. Angus's original motion. But then, since it became a removal of issues, the only issue I would have, Mr. Chair, and it's just a practical one, given the state of We Charity and its current operations in Canada, I'm wondering if we could extend that to no longer than 1 week, so that just to give them the opportunity to get that information. I'm not certain I don't know what their state of play is, and I would hate for Canadians to feel that any skullduggery is going on. So I just want to give them enough time for practical reasons for them to get that information to us.
So at the moment, it's 48 hours. Is that correct? That's 24 hours. Well, we can deal with that as a sub-amendment, and then we would debate that time, and then we'd debate the amendment and then the motion.
So, Mr. Chair, would you like me then to propose a sub-amendment?
It's not really a sub-amendment because it doesn't amend the amendment.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually an amendment to the motion. Yes, it's not a sub-amendment. It's an amendment to the motion, the original motion, because the original motion has 24 hours. So you would go ahead with an amendment in that regard. So go ahead, Mr. Ferguson.
No, he can't. We've got an amendment on the floor.
Yeah, we have
a point of order. Point of order, Chair.
That's what you showed me in the book, right? Yeah. Hey, we're just going to suspend for a second and.
Point of order, Chair. I just want to clarify: was that a sub amendment or amendment to the main motion?
Well, that's what we're just going to make sure that we're squeaky clean in procedure and practices, and we'll just get back to you. We're just going to suspend for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay.
Chair, can we say 5 minutes?
All right, colleagues, we are ready to reconvene now. And Mr. Fergus, there's a fine detail on the number of amendments, sub-amendments, and motions that can be on the floor at any given time. And we had to sort out that specifically. So we, for the benefit of all colleagues, it's probably good to review it right now. We can manage one motion on the floor at any given time. And then we can manage. Can everybody hear me? By the way. Okay, good. And then we can manage one amendment at a time, and one sub-amendment at a time. Mr. Fergus, the subtlety of yours is that you're not amending Mr. Angus's amendment. In other words, it wouldn't be a sub-amendment. It's actually an additional amendment to the original motion in regards to the time. So we have to dispose of the amendment first before we can entertain another amendment.
Fair enough, Mr. Chair. I will withdraw the complication, the wrinkle, whatever you want to call it. I will withdraw it at this time.
Yeah, that's.
Sorry, point of order.
Yes, Mr. Angus.
Yeah, just on that point, given the fact that we have requested a turnaround time in documents that is relatively short, would it not just come back to the clerk who says that there's been difficulties in report to committee if we're having a slowdown in getting those documents in the period described, and whether or not do we need to anticipate that now, or can we just, if this motion passes, leave it to the clerk to send a message for the documents, and if there's a problem, it comes back to our committee?
Yeah, Mr. Angus, the only problem, I think, if I was the organization, I would be concerned about the fact that I wouldn't be in compliance with an order from the committee. Okay. So I think there's it's not so much us, but the fact that it would be on public record that they didn't comply.
Right, fair enough.
And so I think we need to investigate that after. So, Mr. Fergus, have you conceded the floor then?
I have conceded the floor.
Okay, now we'll move on to Madame Latanzio. Oh, Madame Latanzio, have you unmuted yourself?
I have.
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay. So subsequent to the amendment of MP Angus, I'm going to make some very brief comments, and they are as follows. You're aware that, as I mentioned last week, being a new member of this committee, I think it was incumbent on myself to be able to get as much information and ask as many questions as possible to be able to understand the essence of the motion that MP Barrett put before us. And I think that we've debated this, and we've obtained information, and I would say not all the information and not all the answers to the questions that were put before members of this committee. But I think that interventions that were made by my colleagues last week led to perhaps Mr. Angus's motion amendment this morning. And I think that what that shows is an understanding of wanting to work collaboratively on this committee to be able to do our work and fulfill the mandate that we have, both collectively and individually. So I commend my colleague for having put forward the amendment and considering the removal of Margaret Trudeau and Alexandre Trudeau. You will recall also that last week we had referred to various passages of various documents and informations that were made available to this committee. And I believe that, everything that had been put forward, and as well as our interventions, may have led to reconsider and to put the amendment that we have before us. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful as a new member of this committee that we will be able to continue discussions, continue the exchange of information that we owe to ourselves and to the mandate of this committee, so that we can continue our work and fulfill the obligations that we have, respectively, on this committee. So I welcome the amendment, and I think I've made it very clear that I will be in favor of said amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Latancio. Now we'll move to, I guess I should review the speakers list once more. We have Mr. Kuzmarchuk, Madam Shanahan, Mr. Gourd, and Mr. Dong so far. And I'm just going to look electronically to see, and yes, that does also match up with my electronic list too. So, Mr. Kuzmarchuk, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to first off say that I feel privileged to be able to join this committee for the first time. I very much respect the important work that this committee and its committee members have been engaged in during this Parliament. I also welcome this amendment that my colleague has brought forward, and I will be supporting it. I think it represents an approach that I firmly believe my colleagues on this side of the aisle support, and one that I believe characterizes our work to date. And that is seeking common ground, that is being open to dialogue, fostering collaboration, working together in a responsible fashion. And I think we see that in for example, looking back in the over 5,000 pages of documentation that we've submitted to committee, the Prime Minister appearing in front of committee to answer questions, the Chief of Staff answering questions for hours, numerous officials. Canadians want to see that. Canadians want to see us working together. But at the same time, I believe we also have a responsibility to stand up to what is a bad motion. And I think we have a responsibility as committee members to stand up and signal when we feel that the committee is sort of veering towards the shoals. And the original motion that was put forward by my Conservative colleague was a bad motion. It almost felt as if almost a fever had set in subsequent conversations. It represented overreach. And it was concerning, I think, to many Canadians that unelected family members could be the subject of arbitrary probing of their finances, personal information by this committee. And so that's why, again, I welcome Mr. Angus's motion. I think that's why Mr. Angus's motion is very much welcome, because it is reasonable. It is responsible, and it brings the work of this committee off the rocks and focuses on the real work that Canadians expect us to do together. And I think that we are ready to have those tough discussions to answer. We're prepared to answer those challenging questions, but I do really strongly believe that Mr. Angus's amendment is reasonable, is responsible, and for that reason, I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmarchuk. Now on to Madam Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair. And je pense que je vais changer.
I think I'm going to switch languages and speak in French, because I think that the exercise that we're doing now and the fact that we have an amendment before us that is positive, that is moving us in the right direction, in the sense that Mr. Angus has taken into consideration, in fact, all of the interventions that we have made over a certain number of meetings with respect to the issue of having a net that was being thrown quite large. And especially thinking of the intervention of Mr. Houth's father, where he described very well in great clarity the difference between the members of the immediate family, the wife and the children, dependent children, and relations. You've heard me speak to that before, the extended family that can move on to brothers, sisters, cousins, etc. So this is something that shows the quality of the debate that we have achieved at this point, and I'm very pleased. When we make reference to and when we consider the principles not simply of privacy and confidentiality, but also the conflict of interest legislation. So we need to really question what we're doing. What are we doing exactly? We're looking at the situation of someone who has a responsibility, a public responsibility. And yes, Canadians do have the right to know if the person in question, and we're speaking, of course, with respect to ministers and members of government, but also people who have important positions in our public institutions, that if they are ever to be found in a situation of conflict of interest, and that we can understand that it may touch upon the spouse or dependent children, that it is important for the commissioner, and I come back to that it's important for the commissioner to be in a position to examine all of the facts that are before them, and to be able to access documents. So I would like to support the amendment also, because as I have said, this is a step in the right direction, that we would eliminate the brother and the mother of Mr. Trudeau. In this search for documents, and I will reserve questions with respect to that, but I do have questions and I will reserve them for the debate on the motion when that occurs. But for now, I am in favor of Mr. Angus's amendment that he has brought forward in good faith, with goodwill, and we do appreciate his experience on this committee. And we would like to thank him for this amendment, the friendly amendment that he's proposed today. For me, I think that summarizes it does summarize, and also it does give me some relief with respect to one of my major concerns that I had with respect to this motion. But nonetheless, I would like, as I have told Mr. Chair, I do still have some reservation, but I do believe that the amendment that we have before us, as I said, it is a step in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Shanahan. We'll now go on to Monsieur Gould.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you hear me well? Yes, everything's fine? Okay, thank you. As Madam Shanahan said, this is a good step, but I think that it may be a step in another direction. So is it a good direction or not? Well, history will tell us sometime in the future. But what I find unfortunate with the debate on the amendment to this motion, and for all of the hours that we have been speaking, and we're changing the essence and the reason even for which we want to go in one direction rather than another. And it was very important to include the mother and the brother of the Prime Minister in this motion, because in all of the We Charity stories, and this summer we looked at all of this in the Ethics Committee, as we had the right to do until everything was brought to an end. We started to get an idea and to understand that there were people that, and not through the work of our committee, people who were able to reveal interesting facts. And the committee had the advantage of being able to bring forth witnesses and to ask them questions and have them give us answers. We don't just have redacted documents. So we do get answers, and answers that are very interesting and that can give us some clarity with the what has happened with the We Charity. And for the student program, in all of the measures that were set up last spring to be able to help Canadians, this was a measure that was not well understood, and it was also difficult to understand. And that's why we were asking questions to certain witnesses of our committee this summer to ask them what was the origin of this initiative, because students did have access to other benefits. Mr. Chair, a point of order. Monsieur
le Président, vous êtes en sourdine.
Mr. Chair, we're not hearing you. You're muted.
Mr. Fergus, did you have a point of order?
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah, I'm trying to recognize Mr. Fergus right now for a point of order. Can you hear me, Madam Shanahan?
Madame la greffière, est-ce qu'on doit assumer que...
Madam Clerk, do it.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Fergus, point of order.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis j'aimerais présenter mes excuses à Monsieur Gould.
I'd like to apologize. I'm not contesting what he said. It's just that there was a phone call. Our assistants were asking to be able to participate, to be able to listen to the testimony, and unfortunately the line cut off. So I don't know, Madam Clerk, if this was a technical problem, but I can tell you that the line that for our assistants were using to be able to listen in to the testimony has cut off. Can we rectify that before Mr. Gould continues?
So thank you, Mr. Fergus. We'll just suspend for a minute and check into that.
Sorry, Chair. I did any members show that they're not ready to vote for the amendment?
Yes, yeah,
Oh, okay. I didn't see any. That's why I asked.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, colleagues.
Thank you, Chair.